Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 of the Titanforge podcast. My name is Dratnos. Joining me, as always, is my friend Trell.
Hey, guys.
And my other friend, Tettles.
Wait, I'm not joining you as always?
I said and. You're included in the whole clause.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, welcome.
Well, welcome, yeah. Glad to have you here with power.
Well, it would have been more interesting if I was here without power.
That would be impressive, actually. That would be much more impressive. So, yes, we're recording one day later than we normally would, because Tettles' power went out yesterday right before the show would have been live, so we postponed to today. This shouldn't be affecting you if you're listening through iTunes or Spotify or whatever. It should be the same time there. Although if you are on YouTube, that will be why this is a little bit later up there. Let's see. I guess if anybody would like to see, we did watch some Tettles clips yesterday. So if you want to go watch those, me and Trell, we kind of hung out and watched some Tettles clips while Tettles didn't have power. So if you want to go look through my VODs, you can find that, and that's some good content there. There's some really good Tettles clips, actually. Some of my favorites are from Legion, but there are actually quite a lot of recent ones. There's a couple good Mechatork ones. My favorite is this one. There's this one where Tettles just has the bomb and is behind line of sight, and then the Buster Cannon just goes right at him, and it hits him, and it knocks him up, and then he hits the whole raid while he's midair. That's a really good clip, so...
That was cool. I really didn't know what to do about that one.
That one was honestly, basically, I don't know what I would do in that spot. I think most people in that spot would have died. It's just those things just happen to Tettles more often than, normal people. So, very cool. This week we're going to talk about the PTR boss testing that's happened so far, it looks pretty cool. We're going to talk a little bit about these tier lists that I've been making and putting up on my YouTube channel. And we're going to talk about the concept of simming yourself, because this is something that I imagine all three of us get asked about. At least I get asked about this on my stream a lot, and I don't know about you guys. And I feel like there's a lot of room to maybe explain how and when simming should be used, especially in Mythic Plus, but even for Raid, just kind of in general, how you're supposed to do this thing, because often people will just tell you to sim yourself, and that's not always a good solution, and it's not always easy to do as well. So that's what we'll cover. If you're interested in following us on Twitter, we're at TitanforgeWow. That's a good thing to do, so you'll learn when we're live, or sometimes you'll learn when we would have liked to be live, but Tettles' power decided otherwise.
Well, sorry about that.
We also have a Discord, which should be linked wherever you're listening to this as well. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TitanForge. That's a place where you can go and support the show. And among our most powerful supporters are Paul, aka Nerf Starfall, Gyu, Never Nude, Ahar of US Proudmore, and Zuku, welcoming Zuku, who had an owl emoji after his name as well. So Zuku owl emoji is what somebody wrote in this this document here.
AKA Nerf Starfall. We're going to have to have a conversation.
Yeah, Nerf Starfall. Starfall's too powerful. 8 targets when you press Starfall is just too much.
It's unfair. As a reminder, we are not going to have a show for BlizzCon, so next week, whatever, will be a show as normal. Actually, we've got a pretty cool one brewing for then. But then the following weekend, we will have no show. So that's going to happen because we will all three of us be at BlizzCon. If anybody is going to be at BlizzCon, feel free to come by, say hi. We'll probably all be in the MDI-ish area for much of the time. Another exciting current event is that it's currently Hallow's End. Have you guys been going around and collecting your candy from the candy buckets? Yes?
No. I've been doing keys.
Okay.
But I did do the Headless Horseman guy.
Right, and the reason to do the Headless Horseman guy is that there's a mount you get, right, that is instant cast. And that is actually very worthwhile. And anybody who is doing keys this week should go and try and grab one of those, because that saves a couple seconds every time you would mount. You basically get to roleplay as a druid for the duration of Hallow's End.
Having an instant mount in a dungeon is actually pretty good for time. It saves you probably 20-25 seconds to start the whole key.
Mm-hmm. It's actually
why Trell is timing world first keys this week.
That's probably not why.
The only reason is Hallow's End. Yes, he attributes all of his success to the time saved from the mounting.
Yeah, it's a good mount. It's full speed, right? It's faster than Druid travel form, but it also is instant speed as well, which is pretty great. All right, our first topic of the week is the changes to Ajar's Eternal Palace that have come out this week. So let's take a look at this post here. This is a Wowhead news article of a blue post, linked here wherever you're watching or listening to this as well. So the blue post is, hello. Earlier this week, the Mythic Hall of Fame for Ajar's Eternal Palace reached its capacity, and guilds around the world have until the next weekly reset in each region to earn their feat of strength. Just completely ignoring the fact that Horde guilds could not have done that for the past 2 months now. At that time, Mythic difficulty will become available to cross-realm groups. That's fantastic. Here are the balance changes that are coming along with this. Lady Ashvane is receiving a 5% health nerf, and her Waterlogged and Rippling Wave damages are both being reduced by 10%. These are Mythic-only nerfs. Pretty big set of nerfs to a boss that's already been nerfed twice now, I want to say. I feel like, okay, it's kind of a welcome set of nerfs, but I worry about the difficulty curve now between Ashvane and Orgazoa and Queen's Court. Like, it's not like the DPS check. The DPS check on Orgazoa, I think, was already higher than the Ashvane DPS check by a little bit since the most recent round of nerfs, and this one now is going to make, like, I think now the big wall is going to be Orgazoa for guild progression. Because Ashvane, I think now you should be able to kill Ashvane without too much more difficulty than the first 3. I don't know what you guys think about this set of nerfs, though.
I think
you're about right.
Yeah, but I think the strategy that you have to use on and incorporate on Ashvane is a little bit more challenging than 3-tanking Orgazoa, just because, like, if you are committing... Okay, so basically, there's 2 separate strategies you can do. You can do the 2-phase or the 3-phase strategy. I don't think I would recommend the 3-phase strategy to pretty much any guild that has, like, a majority of their players with 65 necks at this point, which should be pretty much everybody. But, like, just how you have to play out the 2-phase strategy with your whole entire raid group getting the waterlog debuff can actually be fairly dangerous. Whereas playing out the 3-phase strategy requires your tank to have a very clear understanding of what's actually going on. And I would not assume that of people who are currently on Ashvane.
Yeah, it definitely moves the, like, pug line from 3 of 8 to 4 of 8, I think. This set of nerfs. But I don't think it does anything good about, getting further in the dungeon. I think that this was not the wall anymore. All right, Queen Ajara is getting a lot of nerfs. The Stand Together and Stay Decree combination is no longer possible in heroic difficulty. That's a good change. That was a combination where if you were in, like, an uncoordinated group, that's a combination where you can't save yourself from sanction stacks. So you need somebody else to come help you. And they're getting rid of that in heroic. So that's a good nerf to that difficulty. Overzealous Hulk and Tide Mistress health reduced by 10% in mythic difficulty. The Hulk nerf, probably not that relevant for anybody making serious progress on Ajara, but Tide Mistresses absolutely are. That's that's probably the hardest part of the fight still. So that those going down by 10% is pretty big. That's going to have a huge effect as well of just reducing the amount of time that all the wards are getting drained in that phase, which is a pretty big check at that time. Draining the wards or empowering the wards now do an extra 5 points to their energy. Now, this is a little bit of, like, nobody knows what 5 points means from reading. Like, I guarantee you that north of 90% of the people reading these patch notes, probably north of 99% of the people reading these patch notes, have no idea what 5 points mean in terms of the fight. Like, there's...
So, do they have 99 points? Like, what does that actually mean?
My understanding is, like, they have, like, 160 total points in each ward.
Okay.
But I don't actually... I don't know for sure. I've heard a couple different sources. I think that this means it's a pretty... This is like an extra... somewhere between, like, an extra third and an extra half as effectiveness. Okay, Squishy says 16 points per soak, 960 per ward. Okay. So, yeah, this 5 is pretty big relative to 16, right? So this is a pretty big extra amount of wiggle room that you're getting with your soaks. You can probably mess up a couple more soaks than before and have it still be fine.
It makes it easier to not pressure surge in phase 4. I think the most important thing.
And also, it means that if a couple people, like, if one or two people die, you're not going to wipe in the same way. It means that the average amount of stacks across your raid, like, if you're executing the strategy correctly, everybody across the raid will probably have one less stack. And that is pretty good.
I think it just means that you're able to do the fight without battle res going into the last phase.
Yeah, I think that's pretty nice. Healer spec characters are now less likely to be targeted with decree combinations that include March in all difficulties. That's nice. In the intermissions, you can really tell when the Disc Priest has to move versus when the Disc Priest has to stand still, or gets to stand still. So that's a cool little quality of life change. Short Circuit now drains 10% less energy from the affected ward in all difficulties. Short Circuit is this effect that can happen when you press the consoles in the last phase. It's pretty likely, like, a lot of Pressure Surge wipes on progression are due to Short Circuit going off in the last phase, and 10% less energy. I think it'll still probably cause about the same number of Pressure Surges, just slightly less. I don't know. Seems reasonable. And Essence of Azeroth now has an increased duration if there are fewer than 20 players in the raid on normal and heroic difficulties, and it lasts an extra 5 seconds in mythic difficulties. So that's another, that's another 5 globals or whatever for your affected person, which is quite a lot of damage. So,
what if your person dies whenever the debuff should expire, but the buff remains for 5 more seconds? Can you imagine if that's like a bug whenever this happens? Like, you'll just die at the normal time, but you'll just maintain the buff for 5 more seconds.
I'm sure they would never have a bug like that in this game.
They would never have oversights like that.
Sure. So,
wait.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a lot of it. Like a lot of the pain points of the fight have gotten nerfed here. I think that this is likely to be. Like, it's likely to be a much easier boss to progress now with this set of nerfs. The wards, the Tide Mistresses were kind of the big things that you kept wiping to over and over again, and both of those have gotten pretty big nerfs. So yeah, I think a good set of nerfs for Queen Ajara now that she's out of the Hall of Fame.
It's just elitist jerk showing up again to nerf the
Yeah.
boss.
Okay, so this is a meme, right? Every time Ian Hazukosis, the lead designers guild, gets to a boss or whatever, and that boss gets nerfed, everybody makes all these meme pictures about it. I don't know.
It happens with 2 guilds. It happens whenever Nerf reaches a boss, and it happens when Elitist Jerks reaches a boss normally, which I don't. It feels like a decent like Nerf curve for whatever it's worth, even if it.
Yeah, I mean, guilds tend to make it to bosses around the same time in each like tier, right? Like, Nerf basically always makes it to the last boss in the same week. Elitist Jerks plus or minus a couple weeks because they're a little bit later, right? And the bosses tend to get nerfed around those times. Like, there's a common cadence to these things. Like, my guild, for instance, basically always kills the boss like the week after the first big set of nerfs, or the 2 weeks after that, or whatever. And that's, those are consistent timings, and Nerf makes it to bosses, and EJ makes it to bosses at consistent timings as well.
Do we think this round of nerfs is because of Elitist Jerks or because of the Hall of Fame filling up? Like, I think it usually happens about the same time, so it's easy to contribute that to Elitist Jerks hitting the boss, but I think it's also they probably have the nerfs set and ready, and then they wait for the Hall of Fame.
Well, okay, so a bunch of Jaina stuff got bug fixed as soon as EJ hit the boss, too. There was something with, like, cannons, right? There was also something about, like, push timings and, like, stack reset shenanigans with how you had to, like, push the wall and everything else. I think a lot of stuff does occur whenever Elitist Jerks does get to the boss. Whether or not it's 100% due to them is, I guess,
do you really feel like Elite, like the experience is that they have no idea about these, problems with fights or whatever, and then Elitist Jerks literally makes it to a boss and starts progressing phase 1, and they fix all these things later in the fight as well? Like, that literally can't be because of Ian's experience on a fight, right? Like, that when they make these like phase 3 fixes to the wall and Jaina before EJ has even hit the wall, like that.
Yeah, that's why I think they have some of these nerfs ready, and then they just wait for Hall of Fame.
Also, like, if
I think they want to keep it at least kind of fair for
maybe that's a good point.
Like, it's not like the lead game designer of WoW. You can clearly tell that his bigger priority is designing WoW versus playing in Elitist Jerks. Like, that's something he does for fun on the side. Like, you can look at the logs from Elitist Jerks, and you can see that he's having a good time and not like super hardcore min-maxing his character.
Personally, I think he's great. I don't know what you're referring to.
There's a lot of strange talent choices being made by Ian on his Resto Shaman. There are things you can point to that would be bigger buffs to EJ's prog than nerfing these bosses. So I don't know. I think that it's a good thing when the game's lead designer is plays the game at a pretty high level. I think that most of the time you have a game like WoW, you would not have a lead designer who makes it to the last boss on Mythic difficulty. Like, I think that's a pretty good thing for a game.
I think it's sick that he's playing the game overall too. I question some of the design decisions in WoW a lot of the times, and I just attribute it to the fact that some of the people who are making these design decisions just don't play WoW at a high enough level to really understand the ramifications of their actions. But it feels like a lot of the time with some of their raid decisions, they normally have it spot on, and like the timing of nerfs inside of raid instances is something that I feel like, even if it may be some just arbitrary crap, it's normally pretty spot on when they hit something with a nerf.
Yeah, and they're usually nerfing the right fights, and like part of that is the game designers actually playing the game.
I really want to get Ion on my friends list, and then or Ian, and get him into a Tolagor with me and like a 20, and then I'm just gonna ring a piece like every mob into every corner and watch them go through the floors and make it known to him how bugged the dungeon is. And then I also want him to see the last boss where he has to heal doubles every 15 seconds. See how it goes.
You're gonna pull Corgus from cross room and be like, "Oops, accidentally pulled him from the wrong spot."
Yeah, and then it'll do no doubles the whole time, and he'll be like, I don't know why you're having a problem with this fight. Like, this is easy.
I mean,
probably.
I'm down to come game with him. I'll give him innervates.
New goal: befriend Ian and run keys.
What's next week? Tyrannical Void teaming.
Tyrannical Void teaming. Yeah, let's go run Waycrest Manor. All right. Which Void Captain Guard? That'll be a fun pull to do. I'm looking for that to be that'll be a nice place to go.
Get some single target healing buffs to Resto Shamans in the process for that one. After seeing me get slaughtered by that pull.
I mean, so Ian, if you want to do some 21s, I mean, you can just hit us up. We're down to game.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be cool. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is the PTR raid boss testing so far. What is the name of this raid? Does anybody remember? Nihilotha. Okay. I think there's another name for it as well. But there's a couple of big overarching trends that we've discovered. The Waking City. That sounds right. The Waking City. There's a couple of big trends that we've noticed so far in this raid. Thanks to Squishy as well for letting us know about a couple of these things. The first big trend that we've noticed is that the damage taken by tanks this tier is almost entirely magic damage. Compared to previous tiers, there's just huge amounts of magic damage on pretty much every single boss. So the implications of this are pretty bad for specs like Prop Warrior. For tanks this tier, that is a spec that has some difficulty.
For sure.
But it's pretty good for specs like maybe Vengeance Demon Hunter. They have a pretty good time with magic. Specs like Protection Paladin with Holy Shield. That's a very...
Sloop keeps tweeting out the words "Holy Shield" all the time after every single raid testing.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a good choice against this type of magic damage, assuming that Holy Shield does work against it. Holy Shield doesn't work against everything, but the stuff it does work against, it's very good against. So I would say those are the two specs that you're most interested in being against magic damage. So,
man, does this mean I have to play with Dretnos again?
Oh yeah, Dretnos coming in big. No, Dretnos is going to be good in keys as well. Okay, look, check it out. Check out the Prop Paladin tech. Okay, now that there's the AOE taunt essence. Okay, I can bubble taunt, and then I can bop taunt, and then I can bubble taunt, and I can bop taunt. I can just just immune taunt every pull with that AOE taunt essence. So that's going to be pretty cool. I was actually thinking about this for Holy Paladins next tier. Okay, check this out. Holy Paladins can play the Essence Copier thing, and they can bubble taunt also by copying the tank's taunt essence, AoE taunt essence, and then they can also take beam and beam in their wings from their DPS. I think this is going to be a good time.
I hate you.
It's going to be a good time for Holy Paladins. I'm thinking...
I absolutely despise you, Dred.
They can also just give their tank a bop, and then the tank can AoE taunt. Like, I'm serious. I think that this is going to be good. I think Holy Paladin next year is going to be lit.
If a
or you can just survive
Paladin
and have trees instead. Do the same thing.
Dude, if a Holy Paladin takes my tank's AoE taunt and AoE bubble taunts mobs, I'm going to have a crisis.
Why? Doesn't that sound good?
How is the tank going to get threat back off of him?
They're going to hit their AoE taunt button that they literally have for sure if the Holy Paladin does that play.
I mean, it actually is a pretty good idea. I'd like to see that.
Dude,
And
the
also,
utility's off the charts.
I hope I don't have to play Trell skinning. Trell skinning is banned.
I hope I don't have to play with Trell skinning either.
All right. Okay. Let's move. Let's cover a couple of small questions about this raid tier because that was the main topic before I veered us off course there. Have you guys seen much of the testing? What are your overall impressions of the raid so far?
So I think in general the fights look pretty cool. The first bosses, we've only seen like the first couple of bosses, and I think we saw Radin and Shadar, which are a little bit later on in the instance. Overall, like the first couple of bosses in this instance have been pretty cool. We don't have a Blackwater Behemoth trying to deal with Z-axis nonsense where we're swimming around. Overall, it seems like it's in Rathion maybe the best first boss that they've made in a while. Like obviously they've actually had really good first bosses this expansion, and we're probably gonna talk about that in a little bit. But like with Talok, Savara, and now Rathion, they're actually putting a lot of effort into the first bosses.
And Restless Cabal, Restless Cabal.
Yeah, but for every
Champions of Light.
Okay, stop that.
That one's
Champions
banned.
of Light
Yeah.
Champion of Light was bad, but the rest of them have been pretty cool.
Come on, I like that fight. I went AFK'd in the corner as a tank. It was sick.
Also, the one interesting thing with the timing of this raid testing, like the fact that they've just started raid testing here in mid to late October, probably means that we have a little bit of time before the raid does come out. My personal prediction is mid-December patch, mid-January raid. That's my bet.
That seems the most reasonable. Man, we had, if you guys remember Antorus, I had the worst time during Antorus because
that was Prague over Christmas, yeah.
Yeah, the patch for Antorus came out like the first or second week in November, and then progression started the last week in November, and it was like progression over Christmas, like Dratna said, it was pretty miserable for many parties involved. So if they're pushing it after the new year, I would be pretty happy for that. And in addition to that, if I'm casting another World First event, I would prefer it not be during Finals Week. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
Also, just not having to travel over the holidays,
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Mm-hmm. So I think
I'll take it as I get it.
I hope that they do that because they did that with Battle of Dazar'alor, right? They did a December patch, January raid for Dazar'alor, and I think that's nice technology to use when they want to do content near, the holidays. Okay, let's talk boss by boss real quick and just talk about what we've seen so far. So the first boss of the raid is called Rathion. He's a dragon. Tettles, what's the kind of high level analysis of what's going on with Rathion?
Don't stand in the frontal and then get the debuffs out of the raid. And similar to Restless Cabal, the further away that you get the debuffs, then they'll explode and do damage to the group, so you get them out of the raid. And then he does actually this really cool ass mechanic in his intermission where he flies up in the air and he'll spawn fire on the ground, and then you need to get to the safe spots. You can tell beforehand how the safe spots work, so somebody will call it out. You'll probably have raid markers out on the ground. Overall, this is actually one of the cooler fights. There is some interesting techniques as to how you have to deal with the pools. There's pools that spawn after the intermission. There's pillars that spawn out of them. You have to DPS them down. But all in all, the boss is pretty low mechanics, but the mechanics that are incorporated are visually very appealing, and they're fun to do.
And they're fairly lethal as well, right? You can't just ignore the mechanic without dying.
Yeah, so you can't ignore the cone frontal, and you can't just stand in the raid with all the AoE damage or AoE debuff, otherwise it will end up blowing you up. But all in all, it's not overly group punishing for individual mistakes, which that is normally the biggest challenge on bosses, is whenever you punish the whole entire group for individual mistakes. That's what normally ends up making bosses challenging, not, oh, one person died because he was off on his own doing the wrong thing. Oh, he accidentally stood in this big fire intermission and got killed by the ground effect.
Yeah.
It's more oh, my friend has gotten the wrong debuff on Maiden. Oh, I've perished.
Yeah, I actually know some lore about this boss. He's actually the son of Deathwing.
Mhm.
And it's cool how they incorporated the fantasy of him being all fiery and lava into the intermission. You have to dodge the mini cataclysm that he does. Kind of a blast from the past.
Now, Tettles,
That's
which faction leader is good friends with Rathian?
pop quiz.
I don't even know which faction is good friends with Rathian. So the Black Dragon flight, like I don't know.
The correct answer was Anduin Rin. Anduin Rin, King of
Alliance.
Stormwind. Yes. That was something we would have
Wow,
learned
Tettles.
Why are you okay? Anyways,
in Mist of
I should
Pandaria.
have, in hindsight, made a multiple choice. That's true.
Yeah. All right. Second boss of the raid is called.
no more lore questions.
Second boss of the raid is called Maut. Maut. It's M-A-U-T. All right. I'm not sure how
is
this is
this
pronounced.
Is this the Enchanted Emissary boss?
Maut is what Nerf Tank thinks.
I don't know. He's the guy that they have many of them in Encourage. He's like the scarab man. I don't know. He's like the big horse scarab thing.
The big horse
His,
scarab thing.
Obsidian
Okay.
Destruction. He has the phase where he turns into stone basically, and he reflects damage. It's like basically season 3 Enchanted Emissary.
Yeah, he has the Obsidian Destruction cast, and like there's like an absorb shield that you have to DPS through. It's pretty sick. Like this is like another. I would say that this is less interesting than Rathian, but overall, it's nice for a second boss. I don't think that second bosses of the instances need to be overwhelmingly interesting. Think like Grong and Blackwater. They don't have to be like the most intriguing thing, but they do have some interesting mechanics, like the Obsidian Destruction cast. They actually have to DPS through a shield.
Yeah, and there's also this like Kill Jaden mechanic where you have to dip into a void zone when there's a big AoE cast, which is pretty cool. I like that mechanic on Kill Jaden.
Do you remember what is it like Trixie and whatever from
Yes, yeah.
Mechagon? It's similar to that. He'll do his ability cast, and you'll have to jump inside of the smoke bomb mask.
Yeah, the
Except this
Giga
time-
Jolt or whatever it's called.
Yeah, except this time it's a void zone as opposed to a smoke bomb. Whatever.
Yeah, Kill Jaden
Oh,
did that
yeah.
as well, right? Because there was the like portal that sucked you towards it and did damage if you were in the AoE, and then when he did Darkness of 1,000 Worlds,
That's right.
you had to
I totally
dip inside.
forgot.
Yeah.
That boss sucked, and I like to forget about it.
We watched a clip of you on it yesterday when you used your taunt ability. Yes.
There were mini clips of me. There was a moofs moment on that boss where I disengaged off the ledge. That was kind of cool.
A moose moment.
We call those moofsy daisies.
That was pretty good.
All right, we're on to the next boss here, the Prophet Skitra. This is the third boss of of the raid.
Dude, okay, this boss actually just cast Shadow Shock, and I was so confused watching this boss. I'm pretty sure it only does magic damage to your tanks.
Yeah, it's
Do you need a tank for this boss?
yeah. Could you do it with a Havoc Demon Hunter, perhaps?
Ooh,
Two
Havoc Demon
two
Hunter
Havoc
seems to
Demon
be
Hunters.
better at tanking
Yeah.
the Titan emissaries than me, so maybe.
No, so like if you could do it with like if you could actually rotate like 2 or 3 Havoc Demon Hunters with their tattoos, it would actually be kind of interesting. Basically, the Shadow Shock will apply a debuff to like the player that's targeted plus 2 other players and increase their shadow damage taken by 15% for 5 seconds. So they need to like taunt swap occasionally, but I legitimately wonder if this boss actually needs a tank. Like I didn't see any super interesting tank mechanics. Maybe I missed something whenever I was going through this boss, but I was very confused.
Yeah, I wonder if you could do this with one tank and one Havoc Demon Hunter. Like, it's only a 5-second tank swap dot or debuff or whatever. So, like, if a Havoc just blur taunts every minute or whatever, that causes it to fall off. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe. I always take these mechanics with a grain of salt for tank stuff for heroic until they release the mythic versions, because usually they like double or even triple the damage sometimes, and then it's a real threat.
Yeah,
Or
or
if something like a Blood Decay would actually be legitimately good on this fight.
Possibly, yeah.
yeah, I could see that being good here. And again, Protection Paladin sounds like pretty good as well. You can like spell warding and bubble, and you might only need to one tank without dropping.
Blood Decay is especially good in cases where it's magic damage, but it's also the magic damage is like in a form of a long dot that you can just avoid entirely with AMS. That kind of stuff's really
Well,
good.
it depends on how hard it's hitting. Like if they actually need to mitigate it, then it's bad. If they're able to slowly heal back through it, then they're very good.
Also,
whereas-
if AMS drops stacks every minute or whatever, or every 45 seconds,
Right, yeah,
then that's
exactly.
really, really good.
yeah, but whereas like something like a protection paladin is good for other reasons, like it has flat DR, it has like holy shield, it has consecration, it has stuff like that that actually mitigates. Whereas blood decays, basically hoping that it's not going to get one shot and it's just going to be able to heal back through it. So it'll be interesting to see if Blood Death Knight's actually good on this boss. Maybe you end up having some shenanigans with Demon Hunter tanking it. I don't really know what's going to happen.
I mean, it's the third boss of the raid. It's tough to imagine that there will be tanks you can't play on this boss.
Yeah, it's true as well.
Like,
Warrior seemed like this boss literally casts magic damage the full time.
yeah, but
like
if you can
almost
spell like if spell reflect, if you only need to not take damage one time to have your dot fall off, then Warrior can drop every 25 seconds, right? Just by hitting spell reflect.
I don't know how
Maybe, yeah.
casts off the top of my head, but he looked like he was like machine gunning.
Yeah, if it was machine gunning, then yeah, okay, then Warrior probably. I mean, even then, if you just have two tanks, though, Warrior can just like it's the third boss of the raid, right? It's tough to imagine that there's
Okay,
class
right,
restrictions
yeah.
here.
That's a valid.
You can
that's
usually
a valid
power
point.
through it. It's more about what the last two bosses need in terms of tanks and how that damage pattern is, and then you use those tanks for every other boss because you can just make them work usually.
Yeah, this boss was kind of interesting. Like it was really long, but it did get killed. Okay, so basically during heroic testing, not a ton of the bosses get killed. They kind of overtuned the bosses. This one was overtuned in the form of it being stupidly long. It was like 14 minutes level long.
Yeah, usually
So-
that doesn't make it to live, right? They just change.
No.
They put those numbers up kind of randomly to just see it get a lot of testing, and then they fix it and actually tune it for live.
Yeah, exactly. I would assume it's probably going to be somewhere in the realm of like hopefully 6 to 8 minutes. But-
Yeah, I mean it's a third boss. They very rarely have one of the first three bosses of the raid go longer than 5 minutes. Yeah.
I mean, bosses that long are just unfun. I personally didn't like Odin for that reason. If you guys remember Trial of Valor,
Yeah.
Odin was the first boss inside of the 3-boss instance Trial of Valor, and basically it was a 12-minute fight that the last 3 minutes of this 12-minute encounter were by far the hardest. So you had so many wipes at 11 minutes, and it was miserable.
Yeah, I think that again, like Odin and Restless Cabal don't really count as first bosses though, because they're in mini tiers.
Well, 11-minute, like the most critical point of a boss fight being 11 minutes in is
Yeah,
a problem.
I think
for other
that's
reasons.
just bad design in any position in a dungeon. It's like Shav Fear type marathon, boss.
Wasn't that guy like 20 minutes or something?
Yeah, that was.
Was it really? I didn't play it
That sounds
at
awful.
the time. Holy crap!
All right, Shadhar the Insatiable is another boss that we've tested. So we have not tested bosses 4 or 5. Boss 6 is Shadhar the Insatiable. It's another frontal cone boss with it's kind of got the Guarm style triple frontal cone thing going on.
It's got Guarm style frontal cone in the sense of he will change. It's like Guarm meets. Oh gosh. Hold on. What was that boss in Antorus that changed its phases whenever you hit time? Varimathras. It's like Guarm beats Varimathras in the sense of like after every 33%, Shadhar, I was about to call him Guarm, will change his slurry and then just do like different frontal cones and do different ground effects.
Yeah, so
based on
it's not like it's all three at the same time, but there are 3 total different breaths. So I guess it's pretty different from Guarm. And then
True, yeah.
each of the different slurries has like a different effect, and they spawn different kind of pools on the ground, and that's pretty much all there is to it.
The boss seemed like it was lacking some mechanics, but I assume that it's going to be tuned to be a damage check, as most of these dog bosses are. So if you think about it, Guarm, pretty heavy damage check. It was one tanked for a decent amount of people. Fed to Devour, also another dog boss, pretty heavy damage check. So I assume Shadhar is probably going to be something similar. He also had a mechanic where he enrages at 25%, which makes you call into question, do you bloodlust at 25% or do you bloodlust on pull whenever all of your cooldowns are up? That's going to be TBD, depends on how long the boss is going to be, depends on how long your tanks can tank the fight. It'll be interesting to see what he ends up doing, but overall this fight wasn't that interesting. The most interesting mechanic was the droplet that he spawns that like will fixate and walk into a player, and then Shadhar will have to like be walked over it and eat it. But all in all, this boss was pretty uninteresting. I do expect it to be a damage check though.
Yeah,
especially since it is the 6th boss.
I think damage check alarms should be going off whenever you see a boss with this few mechanics this late into a dungeon.
Okay. It would be interesting if you actually ran the new Essence Breath of the Dying with the Execute. If it was actually good on this fight, it would be kind of interesting.
How does that one behave in Execute again? It's like a 400% increased chance to proc during Execute?
So the minor does 400% increased damage whenever it's below 20%, and then the major gives you 30 seconds cooldown reduction.
When used above or below, when used in the first or last 20% of the boss fight? Yeah, I mean, Breath of the Dying just looks like it's going to be a good minor for everybody.
I agree, yeah.
I think you still will want to lust probably the Execute phase on this boss, depending on how hard the Enrage is.
Well, okay, so yeah, I guess it kind of depends on how challenging.
Yeah, it depends on if the Enrage or the Berserk is the problem. If you're just trying to like full maximize damage, you're gonna lust on Bull, and then you'll only run Breath of the Dying if it's an overall increase, which I'm sure it will be in the minor slot. And if the DPS check itself is not so hard, and you just need to like the boss is just also it's tough for the tanks to survive the Enrage, then you'll Bloodlust at 25%.
So Bloodlust is actually a strange cooldown, and I think people use it improperly a lot of the times. But so in like a raid situation, if you're going for pure time to kill on a boss, like if you're actually racing the Berserk, then you should use your Bloodlust whenever everybody has their cooldowns available, which is typically on pull. However, if you're racing like a phase, like a burn, or if you have to beat, like in this case, the bottom 25% because your tanks are going to perish, then obviously Bloodlusting that will be superior. You just kind of have to take it one step at a time, and you have to think about why you would Bloodlust at certain points in the fight.
Yeah, it should be default on pull, although a lot of raid fights get harder and later in the fight, and so then in most raid fights it kind of defaults to last phase also, if there's not anything like that going on. All right, Ra Den is the 8th boss of the raid. That's the last one that we've taken some testing of. And this is a 32-second boss fight. A 32-second boss fight, as you can see here in this. Here, let me zoom in on this picture here. So Ra Den has an ability called Terminal Strike that instantly kills the target unless they're affected by Consuming Void, which is a mechanic in that fight. And on PTR, this was spell reflectable, which does mean that you can spell reflect and kill the boss on PTR. Presumably this will be fixed, making it to live, but it is pretty funny little bug there. Yeah.
Do you guys know what causes Terminal Strike? I didn't get to catch it in the testing.
I think Ra Den just does it, and you need to have Consuming Voids to be safe against it.
I think that's what it is.
So it literally just instantly kills you through anything? Doesn't do like an X amount of damage?
It's a literal instant kill effect, unless you have Consuming Void, in which case you're fine.
Yeah, so for what it's worth, I actually didn't get to see a ton of Ra Den, but basically you were going between Vita and Void. You had to like kill these orbs that were being fixated onto the boss, and then you get an ad that corresponds with like the opposite of what you killed, orb wise, and then you like that ad does different things. Like the Void one will give you like an opulent style circle that you have to group soak, or you could immune it off. So maybe there's potential for immunity. And then like the lightning one, the Vita, basically he does like a chain lightning cast that punishes melee.
It looks like a pretty hard fight. It looks like one where you might want to bring immunity classes as well, because there's like a big AoE soak that splits damage on everybody in it. So if the person being targeted has an immunity, that'll be a big damage reduction across the raid.
I don't think you can go like void though. I think there was like a debuff.
Yeah, you have to alternate, or it gets really hard. I think you have to like they changed it after the first after the first little bit of testing. I think, to make it so that you can't just keep doing the same one. But yeah, I'm not really sure. Okay, you do void light void light.
Okay, so I would assume that the void debuff is like a damage amp on like the soak or something like that. so you can just like void. Okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. I don't know what's going to happen with Rodin. The boss looked pretty challenging and is like the 8th boss in a, was it a 12 boss instance?
I think 11, but I don't know. It's definitely a high number. Yeah, a lot of bosses this tier. That's something I guess we haven't talked about. They usually do that for end tiers of expansions, though, right? Like they've actually done that pretty much forever. The last tier of the expansion is 1,000,000. 12. Okay, 12. Yeah,
I'm pretty happy with the amount of bosses, especially for a last tier. It gives elongated progression for some of the guilds that would otherwise not be getting like cutting edge or being able to clear like the last boss of the instance. It gives the people who are actually progressing on it a little bit more time to be able to deal with it. Maybe we have like a 2.5 week tier or something like that we haven't seen in a while. Like a lot of the tiers have been just like a reset and a half, and then it's just dead.
Yeah, I don't think the number of bosses really matters that much for World First Race. Like pretty much the top guilds always make it to the end, make it to the second to last boss pretty quick. Like,
all right, never mind. You're absolutely right. They
within
made
a couple days
after the second day or something.
I think people made it to Agamar like day 1 even. I think Coven and Varimathers died pretty quick.
It depends on.
I'm pretty sure they did.
Yeah,
I got stuck on Agamar for a little bit, and then, or I guess for a lot longer.
Yeah, that's usually how these things go. Although it's possible that they'll put some walls, like Raden could be a wall at boss 8. I could see that being true. For a little while. Yeah, and there, okay, sometimes there are bugged bosses along the way, like Varimathers with the immune bug or whatever. Yeah, that was, so. One other thing that's true about this raid that is cool that we have not seen in a while, there's a skip that is in this raid. We saw these back in Legion, and they have been absent this expansion until now. So you'll be able to collect 4 corrupted flesh samples from the Carapace of N'Zoth, and then you'll presumably get to skip to somewhere around there. So, love to see that.
Did they ever say why they cut out this mechanic for the last 2 raids? I know people have been asking on Twitter and pretty much everywhere for months.
Same reason they cut them out in Mythic Plus, and they just give us Underrot Shrine of the Storm skips because they believe those are reasonable.
No skips. I heard the reasoning for those dungeons was that in a Mythic 0, it took them less than 5 minutes to run back to their body.
Yes, that is in fact correct.
I think that's a terrible reason, but that's their logic.
It's based on travel time. That is absolutely correct. And they expect you to pull every single thing of trash. It doesn't make any sense from Mythic Plus, but like in a Mythic 0, if you're actually Ian Hezekiah pulling 1 pack at a time, it kind of makes sense.
Okay, well, that's something, isn't it? But I think we can all applaud the raid skip coming back. This, like, it's really annoying that Dazar Lord does not have one of these skips, so you can't just go do Jaina mounts every week like you could with Gul'dan. I mean, you can, but you just have to spend an hour killing these random bosses. Yeah. Okay, so that's the raid. It looks like it's gonna be pretty fun. It looks like it's gonna be a good time. I'm looking forward to this tier quite a lot. I think it'll be one of the good ones. I wonder what the zone is going to be like as well. The whole Nyalotha thing. Hopefully, it's cool too.
It'll be interesting to see how melee versus range kind of fare. So it seems like so far in Ashar's Eternal Palace, melee are actually fine on everything except for Queen's Court. Mm-hmm. Whereas for Nyalotha, it seems like there have been a lot of like ground soak mechanics that you actually have to deal with sometimes, which aren't conducive to melee friendly stuff. Plus, Raden had that like that
chain lightning
that does the chain lightning. I just like look at that. I'm just like, oh, that's cool. I'm really glad my melee get to play this game. And just like anything that reduces melee uptime below what it normally is. And
there was a boss that had like Coven mechanic as well, where the walls cross the room, right? The like marching armies, which I think you can mass route those, but still, anything that reminds you of Coven makes you think that it's the design team that made Coven, and that did not make a fight that was friendly to melee.
Skitra didn't look overly punishing against melee, as long as you did have like the mass route, the freezing traps, the Rofs, or whatever else like you would be using to stop the ads before I think they last like 30 seconds for some reason, and then they'll despawn. But as long as you have the CC for them, it should be okay.
So yeah, mass route looks like a good solution.
But Raden specifically looked pretty poor for melee. Shadhar looked, I don't want to say good, but it looked okay. And then like the first 3, you're not bringing melee based off the first 3. So we're gonna have to look a little bit more into the raid testing as more of these bosses come out to give a more accurate assessment of whether or not melee versus range is going to be like what the dichotomy is going to be. It's too early to make a distinction based off the 8th boss, the 6th boss, and then the first 3.
Yeah, because the first 3 just don't matter. Like whatever the first 3 incentivize, you can just play whatever. I promise.
As it currently stands, it seems like a demon hunter. You want a couple demon hunters, maybe you get a couple rogues, and then you bring a full range comp again. So we're back to bod.
I mean that's kind of always that's the optimal thing to that's what World First Guilds did in Eternal Palace too, right? It's not like there were a bunch of warriors and stuff. There's like one, maybe in some raids.
Warrior was just sick for execute. Even this tier warrior was just like super sick actually, and most guilds didn't run like multiple warriors. Fury is absolutely insane right now.
Yeah, it does a lot of damage, but it's still like just not well. It's just the default thing for a raid fight. For most mechanics they put in raids is to mostly be ranged because there's a big room and you have to do stuff in the room, and range can hit the boss from anywhere. Whereas melee has to stand next to the boss.
It's just like how you do jobs. I think they're so bad about designing mechanics that are. I feel like they should be designing mechanics specifically for range and then designing other mechanics specifically for melee. That seems like that would make the most sense as to how to make melee playable yet like not going to be dropped as soon as like they have to actually do a mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always like polar opposites. Like the mechanics are really, really bad for melee, or they're super easy for melee.
They basically never have good. It's hard to have a good mix. Yeah. I don't know what the answer is to that though. That's a really tough.
I don't know.
Challenge.
It's because they're so dead set on making mechanics that impact the whole entire raid all at once that everybody has to participate in. But just by and large, it's going to be your range DPS doing it because being able to stand 40 yards while doing X mechanic is normally pretty good. Shocker.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's the raid tier. Let's move on to our next topic, which is a small one. But Tettles, you put in my tier list that I've been making recently as one of our topics this week.
Yeah, I thought these were actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, so
whenever I was watching them.
What do you want to know about them?
So, okay. So how's the reception been to these tier lists so far? Have you been getting people upset?
Yes.
Because
I've had actually the big spec that I've been getting some pushback on is putting Survival Hunter down in the D tier of my melee spec list. Which
okay.
I mean, there are a lot of people who think that it's a good spec that does a lot of damage in the YouTube comments, although it's still the spec that has the lowest like representation in 20s and higher. And it's also like the spec that has the lowest maximum Raider IO score. Like,
man, it has very little utility too.
It's got an immunity. It's got a melee kick, like all the melee do. But yeah, the immunity is really the big thing that it brings.
I think it has less utility than Feral Druid.
Yes.
I wish I played with these classes more because Abade was telling me that it's actually really good. There's just no one that plays it that we play with, so we can't really see it in action. But
right, and that's always the fear, like when you put a class in a low tier. But you'd think like if something is actually really good, like more people would play it more. But the thing with Survival Hunter, like there are some specs like Survival Hunter, every monk spec that are just like less popular than they should be, even if they're good.
Well, Ellie and Shadow and Mythic Plus are grossly.
That's what I was about to mention.
Are grossly underrepresented too, and
those classes are top tier in my opinion.
I know you're gonna hit the range at some point, but like those are solid specs. Just like very few people play them. Moonkin is weird because balance was good in Legion, so people still play balance, so it gets represented fairly well. But
I mean, it's definitely like
Ellie and Shadow do not get represented very well.
Boomkin is definitely still good though. Like it wasn't played much in the season where it was bad, and now it's good again. It's being played. Like Affliction was good in Legion, and it doesn't see play anymore because it's not.
No Affliction lock players do keys anymore. They all quit.
Well, yeah, because Affliction was so gutted coming into this expansion in Mythic Plus.
Yeah.
All the lock players just rerolled to Rogue or Demon Hunter.
But I think mostly the reception's been pretty good. I don't know. It's tough because like when I've been making these, like I'm trying to just do it as a interesting, thinking about the metagame and like what's good and stuff, and people take it often as like an attack on their spec anytime their spec is not in the top 2 tiers.
Well, yeah, you're actively influencing what people play and what people invite to pugs. So
right.
It can be fairly problematic.
yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But like, I'm also trying to influence Blizzard design by getting knowledge out there of like which specs are overpowered and which specs are underpowered.
Well, I mean, it's not your place to even dictate those kind of things. It's not. Yeah, like
it is.
I think you should focus on just making good content, and that is what you're doing. I don't think you should worry about like what people are crying about. I was just
I only have like minor qualms with it. I think there shouldn't have been an S tier. I think lots of classes are very even on the A tier. Like Prot War and Brewmaster.
Okay, you're talking about the tank one.
Close.
Yeah, I think that. So for my tank one, I put Brewmaster S, Warrior A. I think that they could be the same tier. Yeah, it's definitely it's either like Brewmaster A plus Warrior A or Brewmaster S minus Warrior A.
Yeah, I mean, little things like that. I just would change melee as well. I think Outlaw is in the same tier as Havoc, Demon Hunter, Assassination, maybe even
I think
in
that
some aspects.
Putting Outlaw in a tier of itself is responsible, because I think that if you're like, if you imagine playing a group without an Outlaw Rogue versus playing a group without a, well, it could be an Assassination Rogue, but playing a group without a Rogue versus playing a group without a Demon Hunter, right? There are groups that succeed without Demon Hunters all the time. There are not groups that succeed without Rogues. I think that Rogue in the S tier is a valid thing to do.
DH enables caster comps, which is a little bit different, I would say.
Well, the thing is, I think they're all kind of dependent on each other, and so it's not like completely in a vacuum. Like I think when you rank these specs, you're assuming like a meta comp, like the top tank, the top melee, top range specs, so like Fire Mage, Elliot, Boomkin, or Shadow. God, there's so many good classes. It's actually really hard to think about all these situations. But I think on paper, DH and Rogue bring a lot of the same stuff. Maybe Rogue brings a little bit more in terms of utility, like with all the skips and everything, but DH just has so much that's necessary too. Like the
Zool skip as well.
Is literally impossible without a DH, yeah.
All right, yeah, so for the people who are asking in to see these tier lists, first off, I'll put links in the description if you're listening to this later. If you're watching this on YouTube, it is on my YouTube, but here's what my tank tier list is. It's Brewmaster S, Warrior A, Paladin Demon Hunter B, Guardian Blood C, and nothing below.
I don't think I really disagreed with the tank one. I think you got a lot of pushback about that melee one, which was interesting to me.
Yes.
It feels like for me, melee DPS are basically what is the tankiest melee DPS and does good damage, because it feels like most of the melee do decent damage, but you're just looking for the ones that are like have the best survivability. So like think about, dude, Windwalker Monk actually is just glass can like that class is just glass.
So my melee tier list, I do think that like Windwalker and Fury should probably be one tier lower than where I have them. I have Outlaw in the top tier, and then I have Havoc, Assassination, Windwalker, and Fury in the next tier. And yeah, I think it should just be Havoc and Assassination alone in that A tier.
Yeah, but I don't think that, like, if you gave another tier even, I think it would make more sense, because I don't think Arms and Serve are like, I think Arms is pretty bad. I don't think like Serve is like almost like unplayably level of bad, but I do think Windwalker and Fury should be below Havoc and Assassination.
Yeah, I think you just put them in the same. You could put them in the same tiers on Holy and Rat probably, and I think it would be okay.
See, I think Windwalker should be higher. I think it's in the same state as it was in season 2. It's just not as many Prot Warriors are playing, and so if Prot Warriors were playing with their Windwalker friends, I think they'd be in a much better place.
And this is another tough part when you're making the tier lists, is like you have to kind of make a decision about how much you're going to let those metagame factors influence where you place things in the tier list, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's a good point.
If you're considering that like every good group has a Resto Druid or whatever, then balance is a lot lower on the tier list, but like a big plus for balance is that it enables you to play with non-Resto Druid healers in groups. Like if you were playing with a Holy Paladin or Mistweaver or whatever, Balance Druid is like very, very good in those groups.
Balance would be almost mandatory in something that doesn't have a Druid healer.
Right, and like if you didn't think about how Outlaw and Assassination was something that people had access to, like where would you put Subtlety Rogue, right? This is a tough challenge for me to answer, right? Like, because if you try to think about the world without the other specs, like I think Subtlety would be pretty good. If you couldn't
it's
play...
gotta be hard to play season tier lists. I agree.
Yeah, so I kind of do like a 50-50 thing where like I place things based on thinking about the metagame, but not like assuming that everybody is playing an exact meta comp. Like I kind of think about what's popular and what synergies are good right now. But yeah, like also just what should be good and what you can play and succeed with. So Windwalker being up there high is like, I think that there are if you put like top groups playing Windwalker, I think it would be a good thing for them to play.
I think Windwalker's overrepresented in Mythic Plus though, just because it's been good for so long. So
Overrepresented, dude. Nobody plays Windwalker. There's like 2.
That's my point.
Okay, yeah. It sounds like you and Trell have a very different opinion on Windwalker.
I think it's overrepresented relative to its strength, just because it's been good for so long. Like, it's so fucking bad in raid that I'm literally surprised that anybody plays it. Period.
Well, I think that's the reason why it's not being played at all, because it's not good in raid. It doesn't quite have the same damage as it did in season 2. The survivability is still the same, but if it had higher damage, I think it'd be back into the meta. Brewmaster would be worse. Prot Warrior would be better.
Yeah, and this is another tough part, and this is why my tier lists aren't just like carbon copies of representation in high keys, because like specs like Warlock still see a pretty high amount of like 15 plus keys because they're just so good in raid that a lot of people play Warlocks that are good, and they'll like do weekly keys on their character.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense.
Whereas Windwalker, you don't see any of that. There aren't raiding Windwalkers really. Okay.
I mean, it's like PvP. I don't know where all of these, I don't know, fucking restoration shamans come from, but I guess they're all PvPing or something, and it just like they'll just like come out of the woodwork. Like in season 1, it felt like everybody plays restoration shaman. I'm just like, where does all the people who play this class like lie? I just like don't even see them all that often. Yet they're all PvP, and same with like retribution paladins. I guess they all just PvP because I don't see shit about them in raid.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely an effect like that. Yeah. Also, like we're pretty insulated to like the very top of rating, but I think there are a lot of like mid-tier mythic guilds that just have all the random specs in there.
But there's a trickle-down effect from what we do.
Yeah.
And compositionally, we're going to actually play an impact as to what people bring to raid.
Anyways,
maybe not us, but people that are a little bit higher than us, people will actually look at what they're doing.
The tier lists have been really fun to make. I've been enjoying doing them, and it's really hard to like make one that is free from like that you won't want to change something about the next day. But yeah,
well, it's just one of those things where there's so many factors. How can you possibly give it like a one quantifiable number to rank?
Yeah, I
mean, I like the idea though.
I like it. I actually think it's good, and I think it's good content. And I think you should continue to do it because it's fun.
It drives discussion, right? Like it's even if you're right that like there's a lot more going on than just giving things a letter grade. But I think that thinking about it that way is a good way to start a discussion and see where people disagree and learn. Like you know by talking to people and seeing where they're like many tiers apart on a spec, I think you learn a lot about things that you think about the game in a new way, and you see how other people think about it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next topic we have this week is another short one. We're just going to talk a little bit about simming yourself, because this is something that all three of us get asked about a lot at different times, and I think it's good to kind of do an episode on simming yourself. So, simming yourself is the process of running a simulation of your character's damage, and that will spit out which of your items are best or which stats you should prioritize, those sorts of things. Usually, simming is something that I would consider to be reliable and effective for DPS specs on single target. And I pretty much only use it for that effect. I don't really try and sim for Mythic Plus. There are people make attempts to sim for Mythic Plus, and there are cases where, like, if you're doing some very specific things, you can run some sims and be like, okay, what is going to be better for this number of targets? Like, I want to under these circumstances, yeah. But yes. the like simming in general for Mythic Plus thing is a lot less reliable than simming for single target. So the heuristic of like, oh, just sim it and that'll tell you what to do only works for single target for DPS specs. Everything else, you should not just sim it. You should you should do a lot of thinking for everything else.
And by and large, you're just simming to ask yourself what gear to wear or what talents to wear. If you're asking yourself what gear to wear, I would recommend just throwing it in top gear and wearing your top simming single target stuff, unless it heavily affects Azurite. And then if it affects Azurite, then there's a little bit more nuance to simming. Just kind of depends on like what's going on in the fight, like 2 target versus 1 target. I would generally recommend you read like a guide on Wowhead or Icy Veins or something like that to try to see what what's going on. Like I write the Wowhead, I write and maintain the Wowhead guide for Balance Druid. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into maintaining like the APL that I appreciate the shit out of all the people in the Balance community who do and maintain all of that stuff. And it's like, it's impossible to be able to make sure that everything falls under all of these parameters to be able to sim for Mythic Plus. So I would recommend just simming for single target and rolling with it.
Yeah, or if you're gonna sim for Mythic Plus, like you could use like a Dungeon Slice sim as a starting point and see if there's something that's like twice as good as another option. And then
Absolutely incorrect.
I think anything less than like a really broad look at your gear using anything except a patchwork sim, you just can't get any good information out of. Yeah.
The only way to sim Mythic Plus is you take 10 targets for 40 seconds, you take 5 targets for 40 seconds, and then you take 1 target for 3 minutes, and you look at all 3 of them individually, and you think about what they mean overall. Dungeon Slice has weird shit where mobs go immune for like 45 seconds.
It's not good. No, it's not perfect, but it generally, I think that if something is simming for you like massive amounts better in Dungeon Slice, it probably is better. Like it's
the problem with Dungeon
generally
Slice
is.
There's no possible way it can know when the mobs are suddenly going to spread out for the tank kiting or someone pulling.
Yes,
well, the mobs are stacked pixel in pixel in Dungeon Slice too. Like they're literally stacked 100% on top of one another,
which increases damage a lot.
There are all sorts of things that it does not do well, but if you're looking for a basic starting off point, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing you can be looking at.
I would rather you sim 7 targets for 40 seconds.
Basically, I think that there's not really a sim that you can use to precisely figure out what to do in Mythic Plus. So
I would agree.
But people hear about simming, and especially people who come from raiding want to find a sim they can do for Mythic Plus, and that's not the way to approach it. It's basically they're 2 very different tools, right? For raiding, sims can get you a very precise look at what's best for patchwork, and then for Mythic Plus, it's basically not gonna do much for you. Like simming does not do anything similar.
I think all of us agree that the simming Dungeon Slice can be something you can use to like affirm what you think is better for AoE in general, but then use that as a baseline starting point for what is actually true in a dungeon. Like you gotta experiment for yourself.
And there are a lot of weird effects, like where random abilities just perform better or worse in sims. Like, you know, Assassination Rogue gets re-stealths, and that has a lot of effects in an actual dungeon, and you can't sim that in Dungeon Slice. It doesn't drop combat.
You want to know something interesting? Lashka was telling Verse the other night that MFD sims higher in Dungeon Slice. Would you recommend MFD for anybody for Outlaw?
No, and there's a lot of other, like, there are a lot of things that Dungeon Slice just does not capture very well, because it doesn't capture the downtime between packs, and it doesn't capture the any of those sorts of effects. But it's not like Mark for Death is simming 50% better, right? Like there are some things that do sim like 50% better in Dungeon Slice, and if you're looking for like a quick look at what you might want to run, then I think that usually will be true when it sims that much higher.
Okay, sure, that's right. If it's simming 50% higher, then there may be something going on, but there's also APL inadequacies for something like Dungeon Slice, like
yes,
whether or not you pool resources, what you actually go off of, and when you use your cooldowns. All of these issues are like, it also is the problem of that it's going for DPS as opposed to going for time, and the biggest time save is not always going to be the best for your damage. Should you pop your cooldown on single target versus AoE is like a major consideration that you have to take into account because of what's actually going to save you the most time, but it's one that also just Slice would not be conducive for because it's just going for damage.
Sims, the APL usually is bad for AoE also. Like it usually just doesn't. The APL is very well optimized for single target, and then the AoE is just kind of if there's more than 2 targets, just kind of press some AoE buttons. Maybe it's not optimized in the same way.
I think that depends spec to spec. It depends on who's maintaining the simulation craft modules, and it depends on how much love, care, and attention the spec is actually getting. I know the balance one is fairly well maintained, so it doesn't have any issues like that. We know that you don't press Starfall, but there's some specs like maybe Survival Hunter. I know Windwalker Monk's been having some simulation craft module issues lately. There are some specs in some classes that just don't have it is an abnormally large amount of time, and anybody who's putting in just this time for free work, it deserves a huge amount of praise.
Basically, yeah, the Dungeon Slice is not the place to go, but simming is a good resource for raid. I think that one resource that people don't use enough, and that I think is better than simming for raid, is looking at top parses for your spec on each boss.
Yes.
I think that this is the best way. Like, when people are like, oh, sim yourself to figure out what to do, I'm like, no. Here's what you should do. You're about to fight, Blackwater Behemoth. Like, go and look at what people used on Blackwater Behemoth for your spec and see what the top damage is. And, like, usually that's going to be the best way to figure out what your best options are.
Yeah, you want to do it on a fight where there's no possible way. It's just like a pad log where the entire raid didn't DPS.
You can look for boss damage if you care. You can look at top boss damage parses. You can look at like the rogue parses from the top guilds and see what those people are doing, or like rogues you respect or whatever. If you're trying to do this for rogue, obviously. But yeah, I think that's the best way. Like, if you're trying to figure out like, oh, should I use my coral, my ink pod, my font, my cyclotronic blast? Like, I don't know which one's better. Like, the answer is not going to be to sim it, because those change based on the specifics of each fight generally. And you want to just see, like, if you just look at the top 100 parses, you'll just see like this sea of pretty much everybody using the exact same 2 trinkets, and just use that 2 trinkets if you have them both.
But people do fixate on very minute things that don't actually matter. I get so many fucking questions about my stats, and I'm like, my stats are bad, you should not copy these. And people just don't understand why my stats are bad, because I don't know, I have 2 Titanforge mastery rings with a socket on them that I have to actually wear. It's not good. I would not recommend you wear this. You should really just, like, again, if you're just looking for gear, sim your top gear and just equip it.
Yeah.
People fundamentally over fixate on things that are not within the realm of their control, and should 100% be focusing like on their in-game play, as that will reap the highest benefit of as to how they play, how you use your cooldowns, how you're approaching the fight, your movement, how many casts you're actually getting in is the most critical element to how you're going to succeed.
I got this whisper from somebody that was like asking me to choose between 2 minor essences that were very, very close on damage. And it was like they ended up having like a 20-minute discussion with me about which of these would be better. And they're like, yeah, I have the exact same gear as this one other person who plays the same spec as me in my raid, and I'm doing 5,000 less DPS, and I'm just trying to figure out if it's this minor essence. I'm like, no, it's not the minor essence. The minor essence is like 20 DPS at most, man. Like, it's the rotation. I promise.
Okay, so somebody just asked in Twitch chat if WoW Analyzer is actually worth using. So if you're actually using Warcraft logs to log raid boss encounters, WoW Analyzer is typically worth using. However, I would recommend you throwing multiple, like, you take your own personal log, and then you take like a high performance log that has a similar kill time, and throw both of those inside of WoW Analyzer and look and see the difference between uptimes, buffs, number of raw number of casts. That will most of the time get you most of the way there. And the easiest way to actually gain more damage is to reduce your downtime. And like, that is what I tell people by and large: cast more, use your mobility cooldowns whenever you need to be able to make sure that your uptime is high, and you will do more damage.
Yeah, I think WoW Analyzer does a lot of good things, but it's not, you can't just use it on anything except pure patchwork to tell you for sure what's going on. Because like, it'll be like, oh yeah, you had 25% downtime in the fights like Orgazoa, where you were walking down a ramp for 25 seconds. It's like,
that's why you
gonna happen,
to other people, and that's why you're comparing the 2 WoW Analyzer stacks to one another, just so you can actually see the discrepancy.
But it's a really powerful tool.
How bad is this 25% downtime really relative to the fight?
Yeah, it actually has a lot of really cool modules on it. Hang on, I'm gonna go find a log, because like I was using this to look at my Brewmaster play, because I recently picked up Brewmaster, and there's a lot of really, really cool stuff that WoW Analyzer has. So I think that it is a good resource for a lot of things. But yeah, it's not perfect. Okay, so like, if you look at the Brewmaster module they have on WoW Analyzer, it has like
strikes.
Yeah, it has like a bunch of little tips about what you should be doing. It has a bunch of cool metrics, like telling you how long you waited before purifying after taking the most recent point of damage. But then it also has like this stagger bar where it'll show you like what your like where you're using your purifying brews across your health across the whole fight. Like, just look at this graph. This graph tells you so much cool stuff on it. So
yeah, that actually is really cool.
And then it can like analyze your celestial fortune healing. So like, there's a ton of times where you'll want to go, like where you can look at WoW Analyzer, and like, if you have a question about like what stats you should be using, you can go and look and see the effectiveness of a lot of your different stats in here. It can tell you like what your different things were doing, like how good talents were for you. There, a lot of these modules have so much information in there,
and it's a more, I would say, practical approach to simming raid boss encounters specifically. And it depends on how well the WoW Analyzer module is maintained as well. Depends on who's putting a bunch of time and effort into maintaining and making sure that that is done well. It's better for healers and tanks just because it is this this practical application to how the simming should be done. Whereas DPS will just,
it's so good actually for holy paladins. It shows you like how effective your mastery is onto each fight, and that's like a really important thing to know for fights, like how much you should be valuing mastery on this fight. Less so now, because right now holy paladins just take every item that has the word haste on it, but at times when they actually can make itemization choices, it's cool. So yeah,
these kinds of tools are way better for tanks and healers, like they're saying, because when you go look at sims for tanks, it's pure damage and ignores your defensive stuff, and that's a big part of tanking, is living, obviously. And until you have something on complete farm, you really need to make sure you can live and probably drop some DPS so that you can do so for your guild, and like make it so you can recover from mistakes, and it's not all black and white like it is on paper for most DPS specs at the beginning of Prog.
Dude, if my tanks would die to play more DPS, like during progression, I would actually just tear my hair out.
Yes, it's terrible.
That would hurt me on the inside if they were actually just like actively making bad decisions to play for more damage. Like something that would actually call their survivability into question. Like obviously they probably know what's best, but it would be very upsetting.
Almost the rule is almost always when you go for more DPS as tank, rather than just like the average setup, you're dropping defensive value. And so you don't want to do that until you know for sure that you're safe to do it. So I wouldn't really sim yourself as a tank. I don't know the last time I sim myself as Brew. I only do it for my off DPS specs.
Yeah, you could do it like when you're on farm and you're trying to pad, or like if you're in a really top situation and you reach a boss fight that's a DPS check or whatever and not a tanky check. Like those are situations where you could maybe, like if you're curious about like, okay, I want to put on one damage trinket, like which of these damage trinkets should I run? Those sorts of things. That's a useful spot.
Right.
But yeah,
when you like absolutely need a couple more 1,000 DPS from the raid, that's when you can drop defensive stuff and go for offensive, even if it's dangerous.
And if you want to have fun on farm and you know you're not going to die and you want to just do damage and you know you're going to live because you know you're 10 item levels higher than you were when you started pulling the boss, you don't need any defensives on it anymore. Like, you know, have a blast. But yeah, don't.
It's always controversial with tanks and damage, because if you have more healing, sometimes that actually means more damage from the group overall. Like if you can just heal yourself more and the healer doesn't have to spend X amount of globals on you as they did before, that actually is a major DPS increase for the whole group rather than a tiny increase for the tank. And so in dungeons, that's even more relevant because you only have the one healer, and they're going to gain a lot of their own personal offensive GCDs by you being able to heal yourself through your damage.
In raid, I think healers are criminally bad about not DPSing, by the way. I think that is absolutely not a thing that they focus on ever, and the fact that they don't like even just like throw out a couple rats whenever they have free globals is a shame.
Yeah, in the very top guilds they do that, but like in even in the mid to low Hall of Fame guilds, there are a lot of healers that just don't damage at all.
That's why Disc and Holy Pally are insane. You just don't sacrifice anything and you throw out your DPS as part of your rotation. You never worry.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to our question and answer segment for this week's show.
We got out on a tangent with simming.
We did. I think it was good, though. We could go
on and on about
I think this is something we could maybe cover more. We could find a more refined question about it and do another topic sometime soon.
Last thing. You know how many times I've heard Sub-Rogue does more damage on paper than Outlaw?
I hate you. Stop.
Yeah, you can sim it, and it actually sims better in some cases than Outlaw, but it is not realistic at all. Those conditions are never like that in Mythic Plus.
Let me explain this real quick. You can't sim two specs like head to head against one another. You can only sim the spec versus itself. So you can only sim to see what talents or essences or gear choices you can make different.
You can sim specs head to head on Patchwork pretty effectively, right?
Right.
No, kind of. No, because casters like Shadow and Moonkin are always going to overperform in sims on Patchwork. Like I literally sim 57k DPS right now.
Okay.
I can do 57k on single target.
That sounds like a skill problem. That sounds like you're just not able to realize your max DPS.
Okay. Maybe I'm just like the world's most dog shit.
That was a low blow.
I do think though that the like looking at the sim graph for patchwork damage it's not 0, right? Like often the spec that is the lowest on the sim damage is the lowest damage spec, right? Like when you just go to simulationcraft.org and look at the graph, like okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this tier's patchwork graphs and see how close it is to real world patchwork damage. Let's see. okay, yeah, no, you're right.
Am I okay? Thank you for backtracking.
We have Arcane simming at the top by many thousands of DPS. And then Balance, Elemental, Marksmanship, Frost, Survival, Unholy, Demo, Enhancement.
Top Frost build, no Iceland.
Yeah, another build of Frost, Havoc, another build of Frost. Let's see, what's the worst DPS specs that they have here? Feral Druid, slightly better than Resto Shaman. That sounds about right.
Wait, how old is this?
This is tier 23. So it's current gear, I think. Okay, what is the gear? Okay, no wait, this is 420. Hang on. Why are these people in 420 gear? Okay, this is
Yeah, I think this is old actually.
this is last year's stuff. Where's the new one? Oh. They don't have a new graph up. Unlucky.
Yeah, because they realized it wasn't actually relevant.
Unlucky.
Was anybody playing Arcane last patch? Dratnos?
Well, maybe they just put the new hotfixes for Arcane in here. Simcraft retired after Essences? Okay. Okay, rough. Well, rip. Okay, let's go into our question and answer segment now. Our first one comes from Copta Tank, at Copta Tank. Look, man, there's a lot of letters in an order I didn't normally see. How does the range/melee DPS dynamic look this tier on the PTR so far? Are there going to be any fights that melee excels on, or vice versa? Our guild's going to stack range and stick to a DH, Rogues, and Fury Warriors again. Hey, so we already kind of talked about this a little bit. It's beginning to look a lot like a range tier, but I'm not sure yet. Yeah.
I would say that if you're playing a melee and you're playing a Demon Hunter or Rogue, you're probably in the safe spot. Fury Warriors probably also decent too because they just do a lot of damage. I feel like every guild, especially if you're hardcore enough, you're just going to be stacking ranged. It depends on your level of play, though.
I would much rather. I'd much rather be the guild that has only a couple melee than the guild that has only a couple ranged. But that's like always true, pretty much in raid tiers. Like that, it's rare that there's a tier you can get away with having mostly melee.
I think it's going to depend on what we see with the rest of the bosses, whether or not melee are okay. And it always comes down to like the last two bosses in the tier, what you bring and like what you'll carry throughout the whole entire tier. Because if I don't know, some obscure ass class is like the best at the last two bosses of a tier, or maybe their utility is mandatory, then you're going to carry their dead weight. You will 19 man the first 10 bosses of this tier if they're by far the best on the last two.
All right, we have a question from City of Birth on Discord. How did you go about building or finding a consistent team to push keys with? This is a tough question. We get this one a lot also, because a lot of times people ask us, how do you do high keys? And the answer is find a consistent group. And then the next question is, how do you get a consistent group?
Do keys.
Yeah. I was talking to someone about this last night. I think step one is find a rogue friend.
Mm-hmm.
Like legitimately?
If you're a rogue, find a tank friend.
If you're a rogue, find a tank. If you're a tank, find a rogue. If you're either one of those, find a healer. If you're a healer, find a tank or a rogue. Like, healer, tank, rogue is the core of every group, right? Because every group, it's mandatory for a group to have a healer, it's mandatory for every group to have a tank, and it's equally mandatory for every group to have a rogue. So you want to find those links, and then you can fill those last two DPS slots with randoms.
Okay, so what if you were two of the randoms then?
Yeah,
so basically what you're telling people potentially is just reroll.
Well, no. I'm saying if you're one of the three mandatory things to have in a group, right? Then become friends with the other mandatory stuff. And if you're like a Shadow Priest or whatever, become friends with tanks, rogues, or healers. Like those are the places to start. Or an Ellie Shaman.
Yeah, the core of the group that usually creates the group is the tank and healer. And this expansion, rogue is actually mandatory, and so there's a third core in the group, the rogue.
Mhm.
And I think if you have those three things, then you can actually just bring in people that are only raiders. You can teach them how to Mythic Plus, but if you have the core, you're good. And it helps just like keep the group going from day to day if you have a consistent 2 or 3 people. And even if you're just doing 15s or 16s to begin with, just having like 1 or 2 people helps so much because you can reuse the same strategies and take breaks mid key and not have to like think about every second you're doing and explaining something to someone all the time. The moral of the story is make friends and stick with them if you can. Find the players you like to play with, that
And
kind of thing.
make sure that you're finding people of the roles that you need to play with. Like, if you're a rep paladin and you become good friends and always do keys with a shatter priest, like, you still are going to need to find a rogue, a tank, and a healer every time you do a key, right? And that's
so
a challenge.
If you have 0 people on your friends list currently, what would you do to jump in and put your feet in the water at this point?
Pug keys.
Yeah, you gotta pug keys and add the people that are good. And an important thing is like you need to focusing on your own play is a nice thing to do in these spots as well, because the better you play, the more likely people are going to want to, like, the good person in the group is going to want to add you to their friends list. So
your attitude's important too.
Yeah,
There's also
we talked about this a while back.
We did, yeah.
There's like a lot of factors that contribute to being a person that people like to play with in Mythic Plus.
Mhm.
There was also a really good hint of advice in Twitch chat. It says find some good pug discords too. There are a couple that are relatively good on NA side. I know there's some in-game communities too. I mean, if you can get in either of those, you can probably get into some keys as well. It's just, I would say starting out is relatively challenging, and then once you do build that group of friends that you do enjoy playing with, or you play like day in, day out, it's relatively easy. Also, alternatively, if you're just like a high-end raider, maybe you could get the fast track and you just like ask your friends, be like, yo, I know that you're in my guild. We play together fairly regularly. You do keys. Can you invite me sometime? And maybe they invite you to their friendly 20s or their alt keys or their Damson 15 completes or whatever, right?
Yeah,
there's a fast track for sure for DPS players, and occasionally a tank player can like jump into high keys with their friends that explain a lot to them. But
yeah.
most people would have to start at the beginning and like start with 15s and work their way up with a group of friends,
I feel
which is
like-
what I did in Legion, and I'm glad I did it that way because I learned a lot.
Yeah, this is how it works: is you get a couple of like opportunities, and it's hard. Like, you can't guarantee that you're going to get an opportunity any given day, but when you do get in these groups with the pretty good players, like, you basically have that one shot to like be impressive and get in on their friends list and everything, and that's like, it's really important to, like, the more you focus on your own play, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to convert those opportunities into, friends lists, and you're not going to be the blacklisted person that whispers people and doesn't get replies, or whispers people and people are like, I don't really want a key. Because like, there's definitely that, we don't like to talk about it, but that's how it works, right? It's like, depending on who whispers you're going to say yes or no. Depending on the day.
I don't know what you're talking about. I definitely don't dodge.
Tettles, Dodger in chief.
Yeah, well, I don't know. There's many criteria that need to be met if I'm going to come, like, not even going to be met, but like, there's a couple criteria that I want met if I'm going to come key with you. Like, most notably, I want it to be fun.
Yeah.
That is by far the most important thing.
Mm-hmm, definitely. All right, we have another question here. This one is, I think, the most important question we've been asked on the show. Can we figure out why Trell sounds like he should have a beard but doesn't?
Oh, come on, man. Adverbs asked that.
Yeah, verbal _ sparring.
I can't grow a great beard. It's true. I've been trying for like 8 years. Maybe when I'm 30.
Okay.
Have you thought about taking beard supplements like VitaBeard or something? Have you thought about taking zinc pills to increase your load size?
What?
That is the thing. Zinc, taking zinc pills.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay.
Can we move on?
Moving on.
All right. Next question comes from the shift mage. Trell's gone. The shift mage asks, how do we feel about the previously never pull these mobs now being pulled in some dungeon routes? Colossus in Ataldazar, Matron Alma, Living Currents. Living Current pulls? Are we pulling
At
Living
Trell,
Currents?
at Trell.
All right, yeah, we started pulling all these crazy mobs this week, and
Actually,
most of them I think are worth
I
it.
love Living Current. I've ever since I first pulled the Living Current and realized you could just line of sight the Rising Tides cast, I was like, okay, this actually has to be worth it, right? Nobody just wants to do it, but like, you can just line of sight it and mitigate the entire effect. Like,
Well, we decided to do it because it eliminated 2 very, very risky things on our route that we'd wiped to previously, and I think it's 100% worth it if you can line every cast, which we figured out an easy way to do. So it might actually be the meta play once people catch on. Who knows?
yeah, I like that. I like that. For anybody watching live on Twitch, do not click Squishy's clip. That one's another Monka clip.
Against TOS, I know what you're talking about. Okay, so would you recommend these pulls to lower level pugs? I know we were talking about this last night.
Not yet. I think a lot of these pulls are very difficult, but they become easy if you execute them well. I think in a pug, if you pull the Living Current, not only would it most likely be with the attendants next to it, which makes it extremely difficult, but you'd also probably not LOS the cast, and so everyone would die.
If I zone it to a pug and they pull the Colossus or the Living Current, I will be zoning out of the pug.
Colossus is also a very difficult mob.
Yeah.
Honestly, all these are skipped for a reason in pugs.
I've gone left like 8 times in Ataldazar, and like one of the times was with evade, and that worked out perfectly, and like that group is very good. And then of the other 7 times, it worked once, and we depleted 6 times wiping to Colossus. Like,
hell yeah, bro!
The group like all needs to be on the same page to make that pull work. Otherwise, it's a big trap.
So the strategy involved in pulling the Living Current and the Colossus, like we can kind of talk through it, is just so abnormally challenging, especially for people who don't like. If you're not going to be in voice, if you don't already know the strategy, like the pre-existing strategy coming into it, it's not going to be successful. With the Colossus, you have to snap the mobs into a certain spot. You have to have a person that is actually okay.
You can have the healer bait the charge like they normally do.
Okay,
with the first 2 pulls.
The Colossus has to be the priority target, and you have to be able to have enough CC on the Confessor that is associated with the Colossus to make this pull work at all. You need the Juggernauts to not be charging your healer the whole entire time in the pack as well. And then beyond that, you need to be actually hitting the correct target, which is challenging. The Living Current needs to be tanked in the correct spot, which is one of the most pivotal points with that. And I think that is probably the biggest issue. And then you need DPS that know when they should be looking to line, so that if they so that they don't get knocked up and instantly killed by the Living Current.
Yeah.
So it's just there's a lot of nuance to these mobs that you may see pulled more frequently, but I would highly recommend against it unless you really know what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
We also pulled Matron Alma and a plus 24 World First Waycrest last night, fortified.
All right.
And
Matron Alma's a bit different than the other 2, I would say.
Well, it is a lot easier. I think it's only possible if everyone kicks correctly, though. And I don't, like in a pug and a high key, I don't think I'd pull that mob either, because without perfect defensive rotations and kick rotations, I wouldn't have lived. There's no way.
Mm-hmm. That is a tough one to tank as a non-warrior for sure, but you've done it and warriors haven't, right? In 24s this season, so
no warriors.
Brewmaster S tier.
So that's a hard topic.
Brewmaster S tier. Okay. I believe that about does it here for our question and answer segment. Boy, we've gone off the rails a little bit here at this show, but it's been a good one. Yeah, I hope everybody's enjoyed episode 21. We'll be back for episode 22 next week, and then the week after that will be a little break. We're taking a week off for BlizzCon, and then we'll be back the week after that for episode 23. Thanks everybody for watching. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Later, gamers.